you lose connection with the core sensibilities of the characters and material. So every once in a while you have to reset. And so with Rebirth, we got a little bit of a reset back on the character side. And the reaction's been great, and now it's time to start playing with them again. And we're off to the races again, one more time.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and today I'm releasing the second half of my conversation with Josh about DC Comics Rebirth. In this edition, we talk about Dark Knight's Metal, Heroes in Crisis, Justice League No Justice, and some of the other factors that ultimately led to the demise of DC Rebirth. And if you haven't caught the first half of the conversation I released on Sunday, I highly encourage you to go back and watch that video first, because all of this will make a lot more sense if you watch them in order. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Let's talk about something we might not agree on totally, Dark Knight's Metal. You know, I personally think it's a fine story, but I think it should have been Elseworlds or an Elseworlds story or an Elseworlds universe. You know, but the Scott Snyder led event was a huge success. It was a huge moneymaker. And around that time was when the Rebirth trade dress was removed from DC Comics. Do you think Dark Knight's Metal and the end of Rebirth are related?
Well, I know we disagree on this, and that's healthy. I like it. It's healthy debate. We've gone back and forth on this before. Metal, to me, was the ultimate high-octane event that comic book events should be. Metal was a time when I was going to the comic shop every Wednesday. My comic shop back at home opened at 1 o'clock. I was there at 12:50 waiting for those doors to open because I had to get what was coming out for Metal that day. And I read it day of. I read every single issue, every single tie-in, all in order. It was high octane. It was fun. The art was dynamic. The story was crazy. It was comics cranked to 11. That's me gushing about Metal, so I'll put that aside. But I do think that Metal was not intended to be the end of Rebirth. I think that's coincidental at best. And I remember in the aficionado stream we did a couple weeks ago, I believe it was Pele who said you have to remember that there are agendas at work here. And that's what we see with what happened with Metal. Metal was something, and I've met a couple DC writers. I've met Scott Snyder a couple times, and I've talked to him about this in person. Metal was something that Scott Snyder had planned for years. You can see a lot of ties to his Batman run in the early beginnings of Metal. They had been planning that for a while, but it got shelved due to DC not wanting to go that direction at the time, or not wanting to commit to an event that big at the time that he was writing it and planning it out. But once he was finally allowed to do it, I think the forces at the top of the company, like mainly Dan DiDio, they used it to basically dismantle what they didn't like about DC, which was Rebirth. I don't call Metal the end of Rebirth. It's the beginning of the end, but it wasn't intended to be used that way. I don't think Rebirth was specifically lost with Metal. That, if I had to specify, it would be Justice League No Justice. I am a total mark for Snyder. If you know what the term mark means, it's a wrestling term. I'm a mark for him, but I'm not above admitting that he has flaws. And Justice League No Justice was a big flaw of his. He was involved with that, and the story was just boring. The Francis Manapul artwork was great, but the story was just like, not good. And that was the death of Rebirth, because that's what split the Justice League factions up into different things and led to the splitting up of this new Justice arc that they branded coming out. But I think we can see a lot of what Metal was supposed to be and how things changed with DC's New Age of Heroes. That was a line they did coming out of Metal. I think Metal was originally intended to expand upon Rebirth and the growing multiverse and universe of characters that were coming back. And the New Age of Heroes was initially heavily promoted by DC, and you had a lot of superstar talents, and you had great books that came out of that. Damage, The Silencer, and The Immortal Men were all really great books. But you just saw that about 4 or 5 issues in, a lot of this top tier talent left these books. Tony S. Daniel left Damage. Unfortunately, he was killing it on that book, and then he stopped doing the art on that. Jim Lee only did the art on 1 issue of Immortal Men, which then got cut to 6 issues. Yeah, half an issue. Yeah, sorry. And that got cut from what was supposed to be a series down to 6 issues. I was heartbroken about that. That book was awesome, but I think you can see that DC just, they heavily promoted it at first, and then 4 to 5 issues in, you saw this talent leaving the books, and then they just pulled the plug on the promotion, and it just killed the entire line. Every book, I think the Terrifics is the only book that's left on that. And Jeff Lemire's, as soon as Jeff Lemire left that book, it became a train wreck. So I think that is the entire story of Metal. It was initially intended for this expansion, well-purposed thing that was going to keep Rebirth going. Then there was a change in leadership at DC, a change in agenda, and we just see all these plugs get quietly pulled out and things die off. And I think Metal was used at the end to shoehorn in this new agenda at DC, which was Didio's agenda.
Yeah, I think Dan Didio, I don't think Scott Snyder intended Metal to end Rebirth, but I think Dan Didio was looking for an opportunity to move the DC universe in a new direction. When Dark Knight's Metal hit, people are embracing this. Let's move away from Rebirth and let's embrace the more darker, sinister kind of things, elements that Metal actually had in it. So I don't think Snyder's was the culprit, but I think that his Metal was kind of used as a tool, kind of to implement or start the change, at least. Like you said, probably No Justice was more of the definitive end of it. Rebirth was launched with the return of Wally West as the symbol of hope in the DC universe. Do you think Tom King's character assassination of Wally in Heroes in Crisis was by design or a mere coincidence?
Absolutely by design, 100% intentional. Again, going back to that aficionado stream, I said that right then and there. It was done with a reason. 100% intentional. Wally was the hope that came back. He was something fans wanted back for so long, and even just his costume, the colors. I think Ethan Van Sciver did the artwork for the Rebirth one shot, or at least the portion where Wally came back. You could tell he was the literal embodiment of hope for the DC universe when he came back. And they didn't want it. They don't want hope anymore. They want to go back to this bleak, heartless universe that the New 52 was. And they, when I say they, I mean basically Dan Didio and his crony Jim Lee, who just mindlessly obeys what Didio says. They wanted that hope gone. They wanted it dead, and they knew exactly how they were going to do it. You can see how it played out. They could have just easily killed him off. Fans would have been really mad. I would have been really mad. But what they did to him was so much worse, and it was by design. They purposely, obviously, wanted to permanently destroy his character beyond what death could do to Wally. So they turned him into a murderer. And not just a murderer. They had him cognitively and consciously go back, set up crime scenes with these dead bodies of people that were supposed to be his fellow heroes and his friends. And even go as far to, kill his future self to prevent that from happening. That is not Wally West. That's a madman. That is a psychopathic serial killer. And they turned him into that. And that's worse than death. They could have just killed him off very easily. You got rid of the hope. Wally's dead. Yeah, Barry, deal with it. Fine. Readers aren't going to like it, but you would have got the point across. What they did was so much worse, and it was intentionally designed. They wanted to destroy Wally. They wanted to rip that hope out. They wanted to get that last bit of goodwill that Rebirth had given us and get it out. They wanted to boot it out. Luckily, we have Flash Forward that's fixing some of this now. Hopefully that finishes well and we get somewhat a semblance of our Wally back. And I think we can see a lot of this, a lot of what happened with the other Titans. And this, I find it so weird that this happened with the Titans specifically. Grayson, Donna Troy, Roy Harper, and Garth who were all part of the Titans team in Dan Abnett's Rebirth book, which was excellent. If you haven't read that, I recommend going back and reading like the first 20 issues. It was fantastic. Brett Booth killed it on the artwork. That's why I'm happy to have him back on Flash Forward. But you can see that this team was promoted as being this team of hope at the end of Rebirth. Wally was the hope that brought all of them back together. You can see my new Teen Titans poster back there. It was basically the modern version of that team from the 80s that everybody loved. That was DC's best book in the 80s. It sold, so it was their best selling book. And this was the modern interpretation of that. It came back and they needed to rip it apart. They needed to get rid of that hope, and they did. And each one of those characters is in an awful place right now. Grayson is Rick Grayson. So bad, I don't even want to talk about it. Donna Troy you have with the Infected and Zoe Quinn writing that. I don't even want to talk about it. Roy Harper is dead. He died in Heroes in Crisis with Wally. And Garth, the last time we saw him, Donna Troy had to cart him drunk out of a bar because he was an alcoholic. They destroyed the team. We don't even know what happened to Lilith, one of the other members, like just disappeared. So I think you can see that spreading out of Wally into the Titans is this. They did it with a reason. It was 100% by design. They wanted to assassinate the hope. They had to get rid of it because we just want darkness 24/7. No hope. We're not allowed to be happy, Wes.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you there. So this is the final question. We're going to get you out on this one. Do you think DC Rebirth and Dark Knight's Metal could have coexisted? Like, did DC Rebirth need to die for DC Comics to move forward with some of these other ideas?
DC Rebirth needed to die to move forward with this new agenda. In that part, I will say yes. I do think DC Metal and DC Rebirth were intended to coexist with one another. Things changed near the end. We've already kind of covered that. No Justice was what I believe fully pushed Rebirth out. But initially, we were told that Rebirth was going to be this 2-year deal with, 1 year leading up to Doomsday Clock, which was going to start a year in, and then that would run for a year. We were supposed to get the 12 issues over a year. That would conclude the Rebirth story, and then we'd move forward from there. So yes, you always knew Rebirth was going to end. All good things have to come to an end. And its conclusion could have been fine. You would have had Dr. Manhattan set up the universe. You would have had the conclusion of him, whatever the conclusion is with him and Superman, which, let's face it, we all knew that was what it was going to be from the start, from the first issue. We knew it was going to end with him meeting or talking with Superman or something. And that would have been fine. And it was obvious that they were behind schedule with the year timeline plan going into Doomsday Clock. They were obviously behind schedule on that, and that's fine. But the sales would have remained consistent. The sales were holding up. The fans knew, hey, this is something new we're doing. We're restoring these characters to the versions of them that you liked. We're giving you good stories with Superman and his family, with Flash, Nightwing, the Titans, the Green Lantern Corps. All of these characters were getting great stories. The writing was well. Sales were staying consistent. Fans would have waited for them to catch up for Doomsday Clock, and then you just see everything fall apart. You see Doomsday Clock being delayed, issues starting, delayed a month, delayed 2 months, 3 months. Then you had issues with them just saying, like, you know what, two months with no Doomsday Clock. You had these delays starting to happen. You saw things being changed in the books. A lot of the narrative was changing around Rebirth. And we were promised a lot of things. We were promised that initial Doomsday Clock within a year. Then we were promised the Three Jokers comic by Geoff Johns and Jason Fabok. And we were also promised, I think they did this for Infinite Crisis, I'm not sure, but 1 year later one-shots to catch all of the mainline titles up to what had happened with Doomsday Clock and afterwards. And we haven't heard a darn thing about those things. If you want to find news on Three Jokers, you have to dig online for it. DC's not talking about it, and there's a reason they're not talking about it, because they don't want to remind you about that Rebirth narrative. They don't want you to remember, hey, there are these Three Jokers. This was a big storyline in Geoff Johns' Justice League. But
Well, it is going to
we
be
were probably.
Black Label, so it's going to be out of continuity.
Did they confirm it's Black Label?
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew it. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, that means it'll be good. So it'll at least be a good read. So it's out of continuity, but yeah. But I think Metal was intended to work with Rebirth, and as I said before about the New Age of Heroes, I think Metal was intended to be this expansion into different corners of the multiverse with different heroes. Like you had Damage, Sideways, Brimstone, Silencer. Those were all really good books. They were really nice, and they were in tone with Rebirth. They were colorful, they were explosive, they were filled with hope and happiness. And I think I think you nailed it perfectly when you said that Metal was kind of used as a tool by Dan DiDio and the powers that be to shoehorn in this agenda that they wanted. I do think Metal could have worked with Rebirth. I think you can see Rebirth written all over the pages of Metal if you look through it. Scott Snyder is a person who loves comic books. I say that about him all the time when people complain about him, that he's one of, like, cherish him. He is one of the last big name writers in the industry who actually loves comics. You have people like Donny Cates and Sean Gordon Murphy who are big names, and they love comics too, but those people are dwindling in the industry. Snyder, Cates, and Sean Gordon Murphy, they're some of the last few writers we have left that actually know the comics, and they love the comics, and they like what they're doing. Snyder did not intend for Metal to end Rebirth. That was all the powers that be. Yeah, I mean, I think that agenda was shoehorned in right at the end of Metal, and we saw it flow out with no justice. And Metal gets flack for that, about being, it was the end of Rebirth. It's like, no, it was the start of the end, but it wasn't meant to be that. And I think that's one reason why I get so defensive about it, is because that's not the intent of Metal. It never was, and you can see it, that it was not the intent of it. It was just misused and turned into a weapon by higher ups like DiDio, who used it to shoehorn in their own agenda, and they needed to get rid of Rebirth, and that's exactly what happened.
Well, thank you very much. That was very informative. I know you love DC Comics. I just want to say thank you for opening up and sharing a bit why DC Comics are so important to you. I know that stuff's can be very difficult to talk about, and to share it with the viewers on the channel with me. Very much appreciate it, Josh, and I can't wait to have you back on the channel. I think we're going to talk about Dick Grayson next time.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'm excited. We can talk about all the bad stuff that's happened to him lately.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us, and I'll talk to you later.
No problem. Peace out, Wes.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.